The buzzer had barely stopped sounding when Dennis Park turned to his wife Jennifer, in front of 200 studio audience members and multiple live cameras on a Friday afternoon in February of 2023, and said, "Shut up." I had it. I was going to say that. Jennifer Park went very still. The kind of still that is not calm. The kind that is a person deciding, very quickly, what they are going to do. Steve Harvey had already stopped moving. His cards were in one hand, and he was looking at Dennis Park with an expression that had completely replaced his host expression with something else entirely. The audience did not laugh. Nobody laughed. And what happened in the next 4 minutes on that stage would be the most replayed moment in Family Feud history for the calendar year that followed. The Park family from Portland, Oregon, had arrived at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta looking like the kind of family that wins. Dennis was 44, a project manager at a construction firm, physically large and used to taking up space in a room. Jennifer was 41. An emergency room nurse with 14 years of overnight shifts and the particular brand of unbreakable competence that comes from working those shifts for 14 consecutive years. They had 2 teenage sons, Ryan, 16, and Cal, 14, and Dennis's mother, Eleanor, who was 71 and had been the one to talk the family into applying in the first place. Eleanor had seen the casting call pinned on a bulletin board at her community center and had filled out the form herself before telling her son, presenting it to him as a fait accompli. Dennis had said he didn't have time. Eleanor had said, "Dennis, your wife has not done something just for fun in 3 years." That was how they got here, and nobody in that studio knew what was happening inside Jennifer Park's marriage before the cameras started rolling. Jennifer Park had been carrying something for approximately 2 years. Not a secret exactly, more a slow accumulation of small moments, each one dismissible on its own, that had built into something she could not continue to dismiss. Dennis talked over her at family dinners. He finished her sentences, not affectionately but correctively, in the tone that suggests the ending you chose was the wrong one. He said things like "what she means is," and let me rephrase that when Jennifer was speaking to other adults who were fully capable of understanding what she had already said. At work, Jennifer was the person the residents called first when they needed someone to think fast and clearly. She was known in the ER for exactly the qualities her husband seemed most impatient with at home: her certainty, her speed, her clarity. She had mentioned it to a friend once, carefully, as if she were describing someone else's situation. The friend had said, "That sounds exhausting." Jennifer had said, "I'm sure he doesn't mean anything by it." She said that a lot. But nobody in that studio knew that the survey question Steve Harvey was about to ask was the question that would end the saying of that sentence forever. The question was, name something you're better at than your spouse. Jennifer had buzzed in first. She had an answer ready. She had said staying calm under pressure, and the answer had hit the board for 32 points. She was still talking, elaborating the way you do when you're in the zone of a game and the energy is high and the words are coming naturally, when Dennis said what he said. He said it like you correct someone who has interrupted a story you were already telling. He said, "Shut up." I had it. I was going to say that. The room held its breath, not the game show pause. A different kind of silence entirely. Jennifer looked at him. Ryan, who was 16, looked at his father. Cal, who was 14, looked at his shoes. Eleanor, who was 71, put down the small flag she had been waving every time the family scored. Steve Harvey set his cards on the podium with both hands. He did not say anything for several seconds. He looked at Dennis. He looked at Jennifer. He looked at the 2 boys. He looked at Eleanor. And then he stepped out from behind the podium, and he walked to the center of the stage and he said, "We're going to stop the game for a minute." He did not frame it as a question. He did not apologize for interrupting the flow. He said it as the only reasonable response to the thing that had just happened in this room. He walked to Jennifer. He stood next to her and he said, quietly enough that the main microphone was at the edge of its pickup range, "You okay?" She looked up at him. She said, "I'm fine." He said, "I know." He said it the way you say it when you know someone is not fine, but you are not going to force them to say so in front of their children and their mother-in-law. He said, "You don't have to be fine right now. This is a stage. Whatever you feel is allowed here." Jennifer nodded. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were working hard. Steve Harvey turned to Dennis. He walked over to Dennis's side of the podium. He stood close to him. Not threatening, but close in the way that removes the option of not paying attention. He said, "I'm going to talk to you like a man. Is that okay?" Dennis opened his mouth. Steve said, "That's a real question. Can I talk to you like a man?" Dennis said, "Yeah." Steve said, "Good." He paused. "What you just said to your wife, the way you said it, that is not something I'm going to let pass. Not on this stage. Not in front of these people. And certainly not in front of your sons." He looked at Ryan and Cal. He looked back at Dennis. "Because those boys are watching right now. Every single moment. They are watching what a husband looks like. And I need to ask you directly, is that what you want them to see?" Dennis said nothing. His jaw moved. Steve said, "Let me tell you something. I have been that man, not proud of it. But I have been that man who thought being louder or faster or the one with the final word made me the strongest person in the room. I was wrong. And it took me losing things that mattered, relationships, trust, people who deserved better, to understand that the strongest person in any room is usually the quietest one. And the quietest person in this room right now has been an emergency room nurse for 14 years. He gestured at Jennifer. That woman has held people's lives in her hands at 3 a.m. She doesn't need you to rephrase her answers. The studio fell completely silent. Eleanor Park, who was 71 years old, had not moved from her spot at the far end of the podium. She had put her little flag down very carefully when Dennis had spoken. Now she said, in a voice that was not loud but that cut through everything, "Dennis, listen to this man." Dennis looked at his mother. Something shifted in his face. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to Jennifer and he said, "I want to ask you something. In front of everyone here." Jennifer straightened slightly. Steve said, "What are you actually good at?" Not the answer that was on the board. "What are you actually the best at?" Jennifer looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Knowing what needs to be done and doing it without being asked." The board operator didn't have a survey answer for that. It didn't matter. The audience erupted louder than they had erupted for any game answer that afternoon. Steve Harvey said to his producers, clearly and without preamble, "Both families win today. Full package. No discussion." A producer started to speak into the headset. Steve said, "No discussion." He pulled out his phone during a live taping and called his foundation director and said, "I need a couples counseling resource and a leadership coaching program for a man and woman in Portland, Oregon. Covered by the foundation. Starting this week." He gave the contact information. He looked at Dennis while he gave it. He said to Dennis afterward, "That's not a punishment. That's an investment. Take it." He turned to Ryan and Cal. He walked over to them specifically. He said, "I need you two to remember today. Not because something went wrong, because something went right. You saw your grandmother stand up. You saw your mother stand her ground. You saw your father get corrected by someone who cared enough to do it. That's what a real family does with a hard moment. Ryan, who was 16, was looking at Steve with an expression that was not quite crying but was something adjacent to it. Cal, who was 14, said, "Is our family going to be okay?" Steve looked at him. He said, "That depends on every person in your family deciding to do the work. And from what I've seen today, I think you've got the people who can do it." When the episode aired 6 weeks later, the clip of Steve walking toward Dennis was seen 225 million times in 72 hours. It trended under a hashtag that came from what Cal had said: "Is our family going to be okay?" Marriage counselors shared it with their clients. The hashtag ran for 9 consecutive days. Steve Harvey received so many messages that his team posted a formal response on his social media accounts, the full text of which was one sentence: "Jennifer Park is an emergency room nurse. She is allowed to finish her sentences." 3 months after the taping, the Park family had begun couples counseling through the program Steve's foundation had arranged. 6 months after the taping, Dennis Park had enrolled in a leadership accountability coaching program in Portland. He completed it. He wrote Jennifer a letter, not a text, a letter, that Jennifer has described in interviews only as the first time in years I felt like he was actually seeing me. A year after the taping, the Parks renewed their vows in a small ceremony in their Portland backyard. Eleanor stood in the front row. She was still holding her little flag from Family Feud. Today, Jennifer Park speaks occasionally at nursing conferences about the difference between professional confidence and personal visibility, the gap between who we are at work and who we allow ourselves to be at home. She does not frame her story as a victim's story. She frames it as a story about a moment when someone stopped the game and said, "What is happening here is not acceptable, and we are going to address it right now." The Park Family Foundation, established in Eleanor's honor after Eleanor passed in September of 2024, supports women in healthcare who are navigating difficult personal circumstances. The foundation's tagline is taken directly from what Jennifer said on the stage: "Knowing what needs to be done and doing it without being asked." Steve Harvey has been asked about the Park taping in multiple interviews. He says, "I didn't do anything special. I did the thing any decent person should do when they see someone spoken to that way. I stopped. I named it, and I asked the man directly to look at what he was doing. That's all. Sometimes stopping is the most important thing a person with a microphone can do. Some days the biggest moment in a room is not the answer that hits the board. It is the moment someone puts down the buzzer and says, 'Wait. This needs to be addressed before anything else happens here.'" Jennifer Park did not ask anyone to defend her on that stage. She said she was fine. She straightened slightly. She answered the real question in a voice that didn't waver. The room heard her, and the man who said stop made sure of it. If this story moved you, if you've ever watched someone quietly hold their dignity in a moment that tried to take it, subscribe to this channel and hit the thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to see what it looks like when a person with a platform uses it to protect someone who wasn't asking to be protected. Have you ever had someone stand up for you in a moment you were trying to handle alone? Tell us your story in the comments. Ring the notification bell for more moments that remind you that the way we speak to each other in front of our children is the legacy we actually leave.